Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders, where we bring in experts from their respective fields. Today, we've got Vin Vashishta, who is a data science expert, also author from Data to Profit. He's going to share a little bit of his insights with his 10 plus years background in data science as an expert in the field, and share with us some of the best practices as it relates back to the past, present, and the future. Thanks for joining us, Vin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're working on right now, who you're engaging with.
Yeah, 30 years almost in technology, which I mean, I've earned all my gray hair that I'm sporting today. So started out thinking I was going to go into AI. I went to college for data science, machine learning before it was called that.
What
And
was the
that
call?
was the first wave sort of AI hype. It was back in the 90s.
Yes.
So we've been having hype cycles for quite some time. Had to do software engineering, software development. In 2010, about 2010, 2011, I started seeing the opportunity for data coming back around. And in 2012, I had the chance to start V Squared after being laid off. Talk about turning a bad situation into something good. So founded V Squared, landed our first client in 2012, and really it's taken off since then. Went from R&D consulting, applied machine learning, applied data science, to really figuring out if I wanted to help customers, I had to get them to do interesting things, not just reporting analytics,
Mhm.
moving data from one side of the business to the other. That meant getting CEOs to write big checks. In order to do that, you have to learn the strategy side, the business side, the product side. And that's really the journey from 2015 until now, is helping clients not just deliver product, now deliver value, create value for the company, create new business models, change and really innovate around their new operating models. Working with a number of different Fortune 100 clients. We also have V Squared, sort of a secondary branch now called High ROI Certifications and Training, that is all focused on building the next generation of talent that businesses need to monetize AI. We have data scientists, we have data engineers, we have analysts, we have AI engineers, ML ops, but we don't have a lot of good AI product managers and data product managers. We don't have a lot of training to support data strategists and AI strategists. We don't have enough training to support leaders who run these teams and really execute. They implement strategy and execute. We don't have enough training and support, so founded that in 2019 to fill that gap as well. So
Got
it's
it.
been busy,
Got it. I,
busy 12
I
years.
imagine
Good one though.
so. Yeah, I imagine so. I have a few questions right out the bat that I know we wanted to dive in more into the origination, but a few questions here. When you think about when you're working with a Fortune 100 or like an SME, I mean, obviously very, very different probably in terms of how you're going about it. Let's take it from the SME perspective because maybe it's a little bit more basic at that level. But
Okay.
how do you come in and work with the company? Do you like do an audit in terms of like, because I imagine there's a few phases, right? There's the data
Mhm.
collection part, like are they collecting the right kind of data? What data do they have? And then ultimately, how do you leverage that data or take that data to analyze it to deliver something of value that can, I guess in your case, it's more focused on ROI based, right? So like,
Yep.
how do you use that to deliver better revenue, better profitability, right? So like, how do all those different, and I broke it down into three components, but maybe you have a better system, I'm sure, to break it down. Like, how do you break it down? What do you look at first before you start, obviously, doing what you probably really do, but instilling the framework, I suppose.
Yeah, no, those are good three directions to go in. And you're right. If you don't figure out where the business is today, if you don't have a good idea of how it got here, that's really one of the more important things. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Fortune 100 or an SME or even a startup. You have to figure out where the business is with a basic assessment. It has to be lightweight because you have to start delivering quickly. So big company, mid-sized, small, it doesn't matter. They want results. They don't want to wait 3 months, 6 months for it. So typically I'll have outreach either from the board or from somebody at the C level. They'll bring me in. We'll have those first conversations. We'll talk about really something they're unfamiliar with, which is we don't start with the technology. We just talk about what are your business goals? What are the areas that you're looking at today and saying, these are opportunities for technology. And don't worry what kind of technology it is. Just say, this is an area for technology. And that's where we're really different than most people think about. Oh, we got to do AI. We got to do AI use cases. Nah, We support core strategy. And so that's where we start. We meet the business where it is. We begin to work on the assessment framework. We go through and you're right, figure out where the data is, figure out what data there is in place. And then you say, well, we've got to figure out what data should we be
Yeah.
gathering, what data. And that's more of an opportunity discovery. Talk about core strategy. What is your core strategy today? How do we support that better with data? How do we gather data to help you decide what core strategy should be, whether or not we're achieving core strategic goals? How do we get more granular? Go from these top level KPIs to figuring out what should we be focused on? What numbers help us drive better decisions? Where are our opportunities to automate so the business can scale faster? Where are our opportunities to deliver more value to customers or potentially deliver new value to customers so that that more efficient business has more work to do? So we have something to do with that higher rate of scaling because we have the two sides. We have the efficiency, but we also have growth. We don't talk about those two sides enough. If you start with core business strategy, they already know what they want to grow into. Your C-level leaders know where their growth opportunities are. They know what parts of the business they would like to be more efficient, where they would like to cut costs. Well, let's do that. Let's focus on what you want to do first. And once we've started implementing, so once we've started delivering value quickly, then we can talk about transformation and innovation and all of these other, really cool deliverables that definitely AI can do that, data can do that. But let's deliver value first. Let's actually make some cash. Let's do
Yeah.
that first, prove the technology works, learn some hard lessons, learn some easy lessons. That's where it starts. It's really wherever the business is today, whatever the business's goals are today. Let's support that near term and then begin to plan the long term. Then let's figure out what that longer road looks like.
Yeah. That makes sense. Um, I imagine too, like even as you're focusing on, one or two key value drivers, right? Like that in some of these instances, they may have a ton of data. And in those instances, they have a lot of data. I mean, I think about my company too. It's like we collect so much information. A lot of times it's like, where do you start? Like where, how, like I know you get the focus that helps you, I think, like clear and deduce like, okay, these data points aren't going to be necessarily relevant. But even then you might have still like, close to 100 different data points. Now, how do you look at all that collection and then create a framework to distill it into to value-driven information?
Well, what you're looking at with a Fortune 100 or any large multinational, it's not really thousands of data points, it's millions, sometimes tens of millions of data points. So, where to start? If you look at the data, you're going to get overwhelmed. So, it's not about starting with the data, it's about starting with what's the highest value workflow that you have right now? Where are the areas that you look at and you say, this from a customer standpoint, if we can improve this product or if we can deliver a new type of product to market, we can make a ton of cash.
Yeah.
And the business has already done the hard work for you. And they've said, these are the areas we're interested in. These are the areas of our business that cost us the most. These are the areas we're most concerned are operating inefficiently. These are the areas of our business where we think, from a scale standpoint, the biggest challenges come from, so that we can handle as many customers as show up without having all of these lag times, without you know, having to push people away and say, we're sorry, we just can't serve you because we're not growing fast enough. Those are where we focus. And that helps you look at, okay, so what data is relevant to that part of the business, that workflow, and really starts with a use case. Then you understand what is the customer doing with that existing product, or what do we expect them to do with that new product? How are we delivering value? What are they going to do? How are they going to use it? Same thing internally. You just treat your internal users like customers. How are they going to use it? How are they going to generate value? How do they generate value today? And a lot of times that's the first question. How are they generating value today? In a lot of parts of the business, there's no data being gathered. So the
Mhm.
number of people that understand what's being done, there's four, sometimes two, three, four people, and that's it. They're the only ones who have any transparency into that part of the business. When you start gathering data, all of a sudden that transparency just balloons. Anyone that needs visibility into that part of the business, anyone that needs that data to do their job better, or to understand how their changes are impacting downstream consumers. All of a sudden, this is a much simpler, much better process. And that's where value starts. Sometimes value is as simple as we should gather data differently. We
Mhm.
should gather data about high value workflows, about high value processes, high value customers, high value needs. What are our customers doing with our products today, and how do we deliver more value to them? How do we give them more so that they're willing, sometimes happy, to open up their wallets and write us another check or hand out some more cash to us? That's the important, really the important questions. What are we getting from this data right now? And what does this data set us up for long term, which is something that I have a maturity model for. When we look at, just because you start small doesn't mean that's where you end. But if gathering that data can't deliver ROI right away, it's probably not very valuable to begin with.
Yeah. Um, there's some more questions. I want to come back to that in terms of like how you actually implement it from a tactical standpoint. If you have tools that you utilize, as have your toolkit of third-party resources, are you doing a lot of technical lift in terms of plugging straight into a client's database and going through that? But before we do that, I feel like you're speaking on a topic, obviously, that you have a lot of fluency in. I'd imagine it didn't always exist, and it kind of evolved over time and through these different cycles. Can you walk us through kind of like when that maybe it's an epiphany moment or some sort that, I mean, you go from engineer to being super focused on, you mentioned this a lot of times, driving value, but particularly as it pertains to revenue or profitability, right? And so how did you start coming to that narrow of a niche of like, this is how we can use data to drive these main variables? Because I think a lot of technical people don't think of it that way necessarily, right? Like they geek out on they geek out on all the data that and what they can do with it, but it may not actually have real value at the end of the day, right? It's just more so feeding their maybe innate curiosities. So wonder how kind of like if you could walk us through that journey for you.
Yeah, that's still me in a lot of ways. I hate to say it. I have to pull myself back from I want to do all the cool stuff. I want to build all the cool things. I want to truly drown in data, but I have to back up and say, if I'm just doing this for me, then I shouldn't be charging other people for it. It seems a little bit unfair to be taking their money and making myself happy with it. So there has to be some sort of an exchange. And I figured that out early on. And I gotta say, a lot of it is learning hard lessons. I got downsized because the organization that I oversaw wasn't delivering value in a direction that was aligned with the business anymore. It was delivering value and there was a huge future opportunity. And that's, if that sounds like AI, yeah, kind of in the same cycle. But the business wasn't looking at really long term. They were thinking, how do I get more revenue next quarter? How do I
Mhm.
get more revenue next quarter? And that was my first hard lesson, was if you're not delivering quarter to quarter, that big number long term doesn't matter much. You have to deliver incrementally while building towards that big number. And that was, I mean, for me, that was the first epiphany, is that technology has to not only serve itself and serve our interests, but also serve the business. It has to serve the customers. And if it doesn't do that, if investors aren't happy, if C-level leaders aren't happy, if the people paying us money for our products aren't happy, none of this matters. So there's an academic side, and I think the research side is amazing. We wouldn't exist as a field without that side. But the applied side is equally necessary, equally important. And when we talk about applied, it's really applying it to solve problems, people's problems, organizational problems, customer problems, leadership and decision problems. And if we don't get that sort of an alignment, that was really for me sort of the journey from maybe 2007 all the way until about 2014. If we're not driving value, at some point all of this just stalls
Yeah.
and no one puts enough money into it for us to keep going and keep doing more cool research. And so there's really this give and take. Research gives us the tools we need to apply and build products. And as a result of those products, more money is funneled into the researcher's pocket. And so we have this, really, we owe them in the research community the perpetuation of that cycle. And if we don't prove that what they're researching could be turned into something really valuable, their funding dries up. and our source of cool new things dries up. And so we have this relationship in the research community and the open source community where the applied side of the field really has to prove it. And if
Mhm.
we don't connect with value, then there's no proof. Doesn't matter how cool the application is. No one uses it if it doesn't solve problems, if it doesn't create value.
Yeah,
It's a flywheel that's broken on one side, and that means it's not going to keep going.
yeah. That's interesting. You talk about, being let go from that position and then realizing the core problem of why, and then you went ahead and pivoted into your own business of solving for that why.
Yep.
I do feel like you make a ton of sense. I mean, um, you know, that flywheel for researchers and scientists really do the cool stuff that they would like to do to maybe at some point figure out something that could have exponential use case to it, but has to go through so many iterations of failure. Like, that's great in theory to do one side of the spectrum, but you do have to prove out the applied side because that's going to fund the ability to do that because that's the practical usage of it on a day-to-day basis, right? Um, Interesting. I'd be curious, like, now having been in this for 10 plus years, and owning it and your own side of things, um, obviously there's been a more commercial movement in the understanding of data, machine learning, AI, some of these things that you have a deep understanding of from a long time of experience. Um, Whereas before you might have had an uphill battle to educate people on the topic to pull that, budget out of their wallets and allocate towards it. How has that shifted? Because I'd imagine it's the narrative is a lot more different now. People are more educated about it, whether they really know what the use cases can be in a practical sense. I don't know, but I think they obviously people know it's a real thing. They have to pay attention to it in some shape or form. And I imagine there's probably a lot more people knocking on your door trying to get an understanding from your perspective now as like how can we start doing something with this? Where do we start? What do we need to do? Um, Maybe just take a step back and talk to us like what that education portion was, where it was maybe you were initially knocking on those doors, trying to educate, and when did you start seeing that turn the tables where it is now more so other people trying to come to you for that information?
Yeah, in 2012, we didn't even know it was called data science.
Yeah,
It truly was that sort of a green field.
yeah.
We didn't know what to call ourselves. I didn't know how to explain this aside from saying it was data and analytics, and we were using statistical modeling. And I mean, it was cumbersome to explain.
Mhm,
But really, the distilling it down and the core message that I took to my first few clients was we can use data for something else. We can use data for something more. Talked about originally understanding customer behaviors, understanding why they think one brand is more valuable than another. Why are they willing to pay more for one pair of shoes or for one phone or for one? Why are they willing to pay more for one thing and less for something else when they should be substitutes? Why do we have these different types of behaviors? And so talking about it in terms of the business problem and saying the reason why we can do something that you haven't been able to do before is because we have data and
mhm,
we have the technology now, we have frameworks, we have everything that we need to begin to understand the business, the customers, the product, whatever it is, better because technology. And when you start with the business problem, you get buy-in. It's almost like an I don't care what you're using to get this done. If you can get this done, I'll give you money.
mhm,
And that's where a lot of those early initiatives began. But I didn't get traction for it in marketing. I had to go to parts of the business that were used to using data.
yeah,
That was usually supply chain, manufacturing, operations, very data driven organizations. Why? Because they had to deal with massive amounts of complexity,
yeah,
especially in the supply chain. So they understood data, they understood what models could do, they understood the uses, and they'd already seen some early success. So they were more willing to give me that first chance. Fast forward to about 2017, everything was data, everything was analytics, everything was machine learning and data science. And it was easier to get the technology's foot in the door. But as far as getting them to open wallets, it was still just as hard as it was in 2012 because it's the same problem. If you don't tell me where the results are going to come from, if I give you $1, I'm expecting 5 back. You have to explain to me how you get from me giving you this dollar to me getting my $5 back. And if you can't make that justification, you don't get the dollar.
Yep.
That's just how it is. No matter how much hype there's been, and there's been hype behind this technology now for almost a decade, it doesn't matter. If there's not results at the end of the story, you don't get the ability to do the interesting work. Other parts of the business feel like they need to take over. They need to do more than they should be doing. Why? Because they don't see the data team as capable of owning its own value creation. It can create a whole lot of technology, but it doesn't know what technology it should be creating. And that's where you get all of these other voices that come from the rest of the business. And they say, well, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Here, do this, do that. Because they don't feel like we as technical ICs are capable of defining and owning our own value creation. So it needs to be sort of dictated to us. That's where a lot of data teams are right now,
Yeah.
is they're commoditized and they're sort of in a corner where the rest of the business is saying, hey, give us generative AI. Hey, give us this thing. Hey, do this with Gen AI right now. And it's because they feel like if they don't tell the data team to that level of granularity, the data team won't deliver value back.
Hmm.
And that's what's shifted is now we're looking at leaders coming to me. And this started in, I want to say October 2022 was really when this started picking up, where C-level leaders weren't coming to me for data science anymore. They were saying, look, we understand we need an AI strategy. We need a data strategy. We need an AI strategy because this is just not making any money for us. And we're looking at other companies now that are making money. And we've got to figure this out. So
Yeah.
what are we missing? What is it that we're not doing? Because we have the data team, we have the infrastructure, we have the data, we have all of these initiatives that we've run through pilot, and none of it has made us anything. So we know there's something else. What is that? And it's really to your question, which you asked, you kind of framed it perfectly. Where do we start? Obviously, we thought that starting was hire people,
Yeah.
build infrastructure, gather data, deliver to production. We thought that was the cycle, but it feels like maybe we missed something. And now they are approaching us. And I think that's the big switch that's happened over the last few years. It went from, I just want AI to, okay, so we're missing something. Where do we start this process from so that it results in cash?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we do is we sort of combine the technical side with the value side
Yeah.
and make the connection so the business is getting returns. We also teach the data team how to deliver products differently. We explain how to build reliably and how to build incrementally because data teams are used to being given sort of this, build everything all at once right now. And that's not possible. You can't do that. You have to build iteratively and incrementally. So there's sort of a different way of operating at the data team and at the technical level, but there's also a different way of operating at the business level.
Yeah. I mean, I'm nodding my head because a lot of this resonates. I come from the go-to-market side of things, and I think it's the psychology is very similar in terms of like I know a lot of C-suite founder go higher against the problem,
Yep.
and they don't themselves get granular with the problem, right? Obsessing about whatever that problem is. And if you go higher against it, you don't necessarily know what success looks like or even what failure looks like because you don't know what benchmarks or metrics to look at. So it seems like that's kind of what you're seeing now is people want to go higher against the problem. Again, maybe at that time there was a lot more money floating around in the SaaS space at least to kind of go solve for things. But now it's I'm sure people are they know that it's something that they have to address, be aware of, but they're probably now like, okay, we can't just throw money at this because one, we don't have all the money in the world to throw at this, and then two, we have to figure out what does success actually look like, and that's where they're coming to you for. Got it?
Well, they also need frameworks. That's the other
Yeah,
thing that C-level leaders have been missing. If they go too far into the technology, they get dragged into the weeds. If they
yeah,
go too far into the implementation and execution, they get dragged into the weeds. So they need to see sort of a big picture framework, but it's a big picture framework where they don't have to own every piece of the big picture, where they can delegate and they know what to expect. And you're right, just like you were saying, what should I be paying attention to? What are the numbers? What are the KPIs? What does an AI strategy KPI dashboard look like?
mhm,
What am I paying attention to? What's important? What should I be handing off? How much do I really need to know? And how much can I trust other people to run, manage? And what frameworks are they using? And it's sort of this when you begin to get down into it, you realize it's sort of a layer cake problem. And if you don't have frameworks for every layer, every level, everyone sort of wonders, what am I supposed to be doing? Am I doing enough? It feels like I'm not doing enough. Should I do more? And they do things that they're not really good at. They get outside of the comfort zone in ways that are bad. And you have sort of three different groups trying to deliver the same product, the same value, and it becomes chaos.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point on framework. I think like, you know, we try to operate under like let the data dictate, right? And I think you talk about product and how it's changing product and how to build an iterative cycles. I think like that's so critical because I see a lot of product teams go either, and this is I think leads back to the leadership team, which is like a lot of times they just give them a big project and say we need all these things,
Yep.
but you really don't know how the user is going to behave after that first the first thing that you the first baby step that you want them to take, and is it going to be intuitive enough after that, right? And so a lot of times they're just building out of, you know, a framework that's already that's broken, or they're like guessing at the best, and you spend all this time and resources to do it when then it breaks, or the users don't behave in the same way, or you consider it's a failure because you didn't do these iterative cycles. But maybe you can speak to that point, because I think this is so important to like be able to, you know, put out there a feature in maybe like the most minimum, like an MVP version of that, to
Mhm.
see how those users behave, and then add on to it on layers and layers and layers until you have them from A to Z of whatever the function is supposed to be.
Yep.
And maybe talking us through how do you create the framework for the visibility, which is I think a lot of what you're talking about, so that the team in its entirety, from leadership all the way down to the developer on the very bottom level of things, all are on the same page for what the game plan is.
Yeah, strategy is a framework for decision making. And this is something that's very poorly understood about strategy. So people think strategy is this heavyweight thing, that frameworks are this heavyweight thing. No, they are frameworks for decision making. That's what a strategy does. So when you talk about top all the way down to the front line, you should be able to look at the data and AI strategy and make decisions in a consistent, cohesive way. What does that do? That allows people at the front line to make decisions, and people at the top to trust that those decisions are aligned with the best interests of, or the original intent of this initiative. And once you have that alignment, now you can delegate. Now you can give that sort of empowerment and trust and authority to own what those people are most capable of owning in the first place. And when you give that strategy to a developer, to a data scientist, to a data engineer, now they can make the decisions they need to make. But
Mhm.
they can also work with other parts of the business, and you can make collaborative decisions. Why? Because you can just point at the strategy and saying, that's why we're doing this. This is why we're using data for this. This is why we're using AI for this. And when you talk about iterative delivery, it's funny. I just earlier today finished teaching go to market to some new AI product managers. And it's so important to understand this iterative delivery as part of go to market, as part of delivering this to internal or external users. And we have to treat internal like a go to market in the same way that we treat external as go to market. And one of the things I say a lot is the longer the time span between delivery, the further away that delivery will become from the original business need, from the original customer need. It is, you just, the longer it takes you to ship, the further away from what you were supposed to ship in the first place you get. So this quarterly or even delivering twice a quarter cadence is so important, because every time you ship, you get feedback.
Mhm.
Every time you ship, you can watch how customers use the product. You can gather data about it. Every time you ship internally, same thing. You
Mm.
get to watch what they do. And that's not only going to make each iteration after it more sort of more aligned with what the customer needs, what they don't want. You can prune features very quickly
Yep.
and weed them out and say, look, okay, so we thought that was a great idea. Maybe not. Maybe we should be going in a different direction. But you know why teams typically go in the wrong direction for too long, even when the signal says don't, even when all the data is saying customers don't want this? It's because they have one opportunity. They think this is the only opportunity we have. And if you
Yeah.
don't do that top down, bottom up opportunity discovery, you don't have a pipeline. You just have one. And so there, even when you know it's the wrong thing, you feel like there's no alternative. We have to figure out how to make this one work instead of having a pipeline. And again, this is the connection between execution and strategy. You
Mm-hmm.
will continue to over execute in the wrong direction if you don't have strategy, which has delivered you multiple paths to success. That's what strategy should be able to do. So if this opportunity looks like a bad one, just put it on the shelf, grab the next one. That should be the mentality. It's next opportunity. Was that a dead end? Okay, let's stop. Did costs begin to scale faster than returns? Okay, let's stop. Let's move on to the next one. That's why these two sides, the execution and the strategy side, they really are connected at the hip. And whether that's a big company or a small company, it works the same way.
Yeah.
If you keep delivering iteratively, you keep using data from how people use, how people touch, interact with, and whether they actually achieve the goals, the outcomes, the experiences that they wanted to achieve. When you're measuring those and truly staying true to this is what we said we would deliver to you, are we really doing that for you? If you stay true to those and you continue to measure them, you can be so much more successful. And go to market should be iterative every single time. And we have
Yeah.
to look at multiple technologies. You don't have to go to market with AI. You can go to market with digital. Why? How do you gather data if you don't have a digital product? How are you supposed to gather data? Doesn't like appear out of nowhere. So you need something in place to gather data. How do you create your first analytics product? How do you create your first descriptive model? Well, you need data. If you don't have data, you can't build a model. It doesn't, I mean, there's no way you can make that work. If you don't slowly evolve your capabilities, if you don't get the reps in, you never get to the point where you're capable of fielding advanced
Mm-hmm.
models. If you can't do a simple one, you can't do an advanced one. And if you don't iterate, this is why iteration is such a critical framework. If you don't iterate, none of the pieces are there in the first place. And so you have everything you need to deliver value, and you even have the requirement that you have to put these things in place in pieces or it all falls apart anyway. So why not do it that way?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're speaking to like I think technical, like when I think of like personality types and like technical individuals, I think you have them typically in two camps, which is one is going to be the perfectionist syndrome, which is I think
Mhm,
counterintuitive to what you're talking about. But then there are the other half that I think understand the iterative cycles and are obsessive about that as part of the way that they build. But
mhm.
it is almost like very polarizing in terms of I think the personality that I've seen in that space from a technical perspective.
Well, I think
Um,
you have to really attack it from the perspective of we know perfect's not possible.
yeah,
And so the only way you should ever be able to let go of a product is if you know you can come back and fix it
yeah,
because you know you're going to have to.
yeah,
It will never be done. It'll never be perfect. And if you're not doing things iteratively, what you're doing is you're sort of deluding yourself into thinking I've delivered this thing that's perfect, but it's not because it never will be.
yeah,
You know that. So iterative is the only way to go.
yeah. Oh no, we're up on time real quick, but I wanted to kind of go into just some, at least like some of the actionable, tangible takeaways. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but do you have a toolbox of things like for me, for example, I think of when we're on the go-to-market side, if somebody's trying to target SMBs versus mid-market versus enterprise, I know that there's a certain set of channels that work for delivering messaging to SMB that's going to be different than enterprise, et cetera. In
Mhm.
your case, like if there's different, if you're dealing with like different departments or different types of data sets, is there a toolkit that you go to that you know of, like from third party tools or from, from a technical standpoint of like how you're going to leverage their internal database to pull um to pull the data sets into something that's going to be deliverable for them that could create value.
Yeah, for me, it's really about looking at so they're going to have one big central platform.
Yeah,
And I don't have a single one that's a go-to
got it.
because most businesses have already sort of aligned themselves,
To
whether
some
it's an SAP shop or an IBM shop or an AWS shop or an Azure shop or some of them are Salesforce Plus. And so you have really what is the central platform that the company has already chosen Let's figure out, as long as that one can fit their needs and there's a roadmap in place, let's use that as the base and then figure out what components we need to build around it. And for me, that's the most successful approach. And the only way you can make that work is if you have something holistic where you're bringing as many decision makers together to look at the platform and to evaluate it and say, does this work for me? And I mean, not like could it, but does it? Is this real world? Can this be usable for what you need it to be? And if it isn't, let's figure out how to get it there. And
Got
it's
it.
that sort of commitment to outcomes and results. You find vendors that are committed to the same
Yeah.
thing, where their sales engineers or their customer success people or sometimes consultants, they just show up and they say, yeah, what is it going to take? What do we have to do to integrate this so that you can use it and you get the value that you want out of it? And there's definitely some companies, I'm not going to, pitch anybody, but there's some companies that do that better than others.
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm looking for. Those are good partners, the people that just show up and say, what's it going to take? I want this as part of your infrastructure for the next decade. What do I have to do? What do we do to make this work for you?
Awesome. On that note, I want to say thank you so much, Vin, for taking the time. I think there's a lot of like great takeaways, a lot of great nuggets in here that our audience can do to just kind of get started, and really kind of leverage data for real ROI, driving revenue, improving profitability, things of that nature. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks.